Hello and welcome to SacTown Talks. Today we have a special guest coming on for a repeat, Senator Lena Gonzalez. Lena, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming back on.
Thanks so much again for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. You know, last time we were on, we were having a great conversation, but we actually got disconnected because of broadband issues for anyone who listened before. Um, kind of,
Yeah.
I guess, circling back, you know, that's been kind of a big issue coming lately, you know, as we're all at home, we're all distance learning. You know, I've even experienced it, you know, with my kids and at the school. You know, it's a funny story. The first day of school, all the teachers, you know, started Zooming, live broadcasting from the same school at the same point. And, you know, everyone was blurry and didn't really work because it was just too much bandwidth going on at one time. And so, you know, even though schools have had 6 months to kind of adjust to this and kind of up their bandwidth, it's still not enough. So I can't imagine, you know, how this is affecting, you know, schools across the state. And, you know, this is something that, you know, is near and dear to your heart. And so kind of wanted to touch base with you again and kind of talk a little bit about kind of broadband and kind of touch base on kind of SB 1130 and kind of what's the latest with that and kind of your plans for broadband for all.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we see it, of course, being a mom myself with 3 boys, working from home. My husband works from home, just like every other Californian that we're hearing about, and even really every other American, the same thing. We have the same struggle. Distance learning is working for some kids that have good internet speed, and it's not working for some kids that may not have the resources to pay for that high internet speed. It's also an issue of telehealth services. We're seeing more seniors that are actually liking telehealth. So talking to many of my community clinics, and they're seeing now the digital inequities that are happening with seniors that may not have the adequate broadband speeds. And so we're seeing it in very different elements. SB 1130 looked at just one particular fund, which was the California Services Fund, to be able to look at faster speeds for investments, for California ratepayer investments, faster speeds, opportunities for local governments to apply for grants through the fund, ensuring that there was an open access regime to allow more competition, like smaller internet service providers to now be a part of the investments. It had all of these different new ideas, but it was certainly warranted because we were in this age of COVID where we need to start talking about this. And this bill was actually brought up back in February before COVID hit. We had sort of an idea to bring this forward. And then when COVID hit, it just made the issue even more important. And so we're going to continue to push. It unfortunately didn't make it through the legislature. It was sort of just died in the assembly, unfortunately. But we're going to have discussions throughout the fall and continue the conversation for next legislative year to ensure that we continue to keep broadband at the forefront.
Kind of what were, I guess, some of the hurdles you encountered in the assembly, and kind of what do you think is going to help to overcome this next year?
That's a great question. I think coming in as a new member, I had been working on digital inclusion policy before, but not at the state level. And so understanding, I wanted to come in with a completely collaborative approach that rural communities and urban communities oftentimes we're looked at or we're working on things in silos when we should actually be collaborating. Because you're in a rural community and don't have access, well, we feel the same thing in LA in some cases. There are some places in my district in unincorporated Los Angeles that have zero access to the internet. And if they do have access, just like a rural community, sometimes it's a very slow speeds. So it doesn't even matter if you have internet because you're not going to be able to download or upload anything as a student, as a teacher, et cetera. And so I think I want to be able to continue to come in with this collaborative approach that this is a rural and urban solution, and that we need everybody at the table, stakeholders everywhere, to ensure that we get to the right point with investment and talking about how we could be better invested in by these larger companies, and also look for ways to innovate with smaller internet service providers that would like to come to the table and be a part of the discussion as well.
You know, I know the governor released an executive order kind of dealing with kind of broadband and some of these issues. Can you kind of explain to us kind of what that executive order did, and does that connect at all to kind of what you're trying to do as well?
Yeah, it actually really did connect. And we had been in conversations with the administration quite frequently throughout SB 1130's sort of life through the legislature. And a lot of what the executive order did was, for instance, put a goal of 100 megabits download speed, which is exactly what SB 1130 did as well. We said any investment that happens with California Service Fund dollars should be high speeds, and we would like a goal of 100 upload, 100 download, but the minimum requirement should be 25, 25. The executive order said, yes, 100 is a good goal. He also brought into play the state participating in a broadband action plan and getting that done by the end of the year. That would be done by the Department of Technology in coordination with the PUC, and finding ways that the state could become more innovative with deployment and accessibility for broadband. And then also promoting what federal sort of grant opportunities might be out there for local governments to start participating in. For instance, the FCC just announced a few months ago, I believe it's $20 billion grant for rural communities. And so a lot of people don't know about that unless you kind of dig in through, you're doing a lot of research. So we need to be able to, as a state, promote those grants, even if it's not funneled through us. So at least local governments have an opportunity to directly apply for those grants, and it's easily accessible and available and just easy to hopefully win and be granted.
Has there ever been, I guess, a look statewide to see, I guess, how much it would cost to kind of, bring broadband to everyone? Do you know if there's ever been kind of like a LAO report or some sort of independent group that kind of would look at the cost and see, how much, how far do we have to go before, we can reach some of these goals?
Yeah, I mean, I believe there has been through the LAO. I don't think there's anything been done that has been done recently. And so I'm hoping that this action plan will look at sort of even some preliminary economic assessments. I've heard anywhere from like 2 to 3 billion. I've heard more than that. I've heard less, but we need a really good, to your point, it's a great point. We need an actual economic analysis to see what this could cost, and also how we can leverage our private, private dollars with many of the relationships that we have, as well as federal investment as well through additional CARES Act funding, or like we said, these additional FCC grants that could complement what we're doing in the state through the California Services Fund, or extending the fund. It's going to be, the ratepayers will stop paying per legislation by 2022. So if we were able to extend that fund or extend the rate through the California Services Fund, that may be able to garner some more investment for leveraging.
One thing I was thinking of is, because of COVID, a lot of people are staying home, working from home. You're seeing companies just completely shift the paradigm and getting rid of office space. Pinterest just announced they're getting rid of their office space. A lot of big companies are selling their, offices and just telling their employees to stay home. And it's kind of, we've said this before, but, there's less community. People are driving less. So I guess there's kind of a relationship now between broadband and greenhouse gas and emissions, and the incentive of people not commuting and keeping people home. I guess, is that something that you could look at, is kind of looking at greenhouse gas emission funding to kind of help fund this broadband for all?
That's a great point. I have heard of that, and we're looking at all sort of creative options, and it is a really good parallel, because we are starting to see that small businesses, large businesses are changing their business models, and you're right, they're looking at the operational costs that they can save and what else they can invest in, whether that's Wi-Fi hotspots, or helping the large tech companies potentially being able to help with this sort of broadband initiative overall through this for the state would be so key in what we're trying to do, and also being able to be at the forefront at lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. I think that would be a great compliment and great idea. You just thought of my next bill idea. Fantastic.
Something we keep hearing about, is 5G, and about how 5G is going to be this great kind of game-changing technology coming out. I guess, is the future of broadband for all possibly wireless? Is that possible, or do you think a wired infrastructure is still the way to go?
I think we have to think larger than that, right? I mean, wireless. I was just talking to actually a member of IBEW who was saying the same exact thing. 5G is kind of our big initiative to get to, except for the fact that a lot of international markets are beyond that. And they're thinking larger and bigger, and they're at these international forums exchanging ideas. And I would just hope that one day we could be there and start thinking a little bit larger of what our technology infrastructure could be. Right now, we still have DSL, we still have copper wires. I mean, we're still very much antiquated. So I think disrupting that system, like any tech person would say, is what we need to be able to do to start making headway with the digital divide in this environment.
Kind of, we're just kind of touching on, I guess, kind of budgetary issues for next year. Obviously, we're guessing that there's not going to be as much funding next year as there was this year, as people didn't make as much money to tax this year. So kind of keeping on the same line of, I guess, kind of like game-changing technologies that could, help save money for the state, whether it's like continuous glucose monitoring or some other technologies. Kind of what are some of these kind of technologies you're looking at that could help, kind of save the state money and kind of implement and bring the state forward in 2021?
Well, I think, again, it kind of goes back to, there's not one particular one, but I think, for me, I think it's really adopting and figuring out the broadband situation first, because that is the way we communicate. That is the way we function as, for businesses. That is the way we are now doing our medical transactions, financial transactions. People are now needing to innovate with business because that's what they need to do, be online, et cetera. And so I think it's hard to talk about anything else without really discussing the elephant in the room that is broadband and ensuring that we're getting this right as a state, especially as the fifth largest economy. From there, I think, again, we have to bring in all partners. The glucose monitoring, separate from that, I think is one opportunity that the FDA has now recognized and suggested that is something that, people with diabetes and COVID could do. Contact tracing, there's a lot of new innovations happening within contact tracing right now. But I also think just being able to spread the message of what COVID can potentially, the harms, wearing masks and the preventative measures. I mean, there's a lot of even just social media that we can do, like targeting certain areas that are places where maybe some very like Latinos, African Americans, people that have been historically through this process have been affected, and geo-targeting them to realize, like, hey, you need to continue to wear a mask. These are your rights when you're at the workplace. I mean, simple things like that, and where we can really ensure that we're educating folks. So I don't know that there's one necessarily one type of technology, but I think there's innovative ways and we can educate the public as well.
Yeah, we kind of touched upon this last time, but you have had, the most interesting year and a half as a legislative member, no shortage of drama and issues, and kind of, the last 2 weeks or the last couple of days of session seem to be kind of full of drama and suspense. Can you kind of talk to us about how it was kind of legislating those last few days, kind of with these kind of social distancing requirements, and kind of, how hard was it to get stuff done there at the end?
Yeah, this was a very unique situation. We were off recess, then came back, and then off, and then back again. And then, I think the Senate did such an incredible job of getting in front of the issue and looking at scenario planning to a T to ensure that we looked at and thought about every single situation. And I appreciated that because even from, our special services cars that had, plexiglass, if you will, I think it was like a plastic to separate us, a mandatory mask requirement. In my desk where I was sitting on the floor, which was in the back, I had a plexiglass around me, ensuring that we weren't mingling while we were on the floor. I mean, really strict guardrails. And I also ensured that, we didn't have a ton of staff in our offices. There was one staff member, if that. And so I've actually looked at kind of changing my internal models, instead of having a big stack of paper in front of me and having a staff member there, we're looking at doing everything remote because we're probably going to be in the same situation next year.
Right.
So doing things on like a platform where it can easily be edited live and, just point in time, because we have to start thinking about things more innovatively, but also ensure that the health and safety of our employees and Senate staff, is priority. So very unique situation, but and we also had remote voting as well, which was another caveat to the Senate, and it created a lot longer time frame to get work done, but I think we did it in a more safe manner, which was a very good thing.
Did you find it, we're kind of hearing from some members that it was kind of difficult to kind of whip their votes because it was hard to communicate with their colleagues. I guess, did you experience that? And I guess when you're on the floor, how could your colleagues kind of communicate with you?
This is where we have text and we have phone calls and Zooms. And so, I think my phone was on burnout mode like every other day, because I was constantly text messaging my colleagues, constantly on Zooms, whether it's the Latino or the Women's Caucus, constantly on the phone. That's just what we had to do. And
Right.
It's different because, we're used to just going up to someone and saying, hey, how are you feeling on SB so-and-so?
Right.
But we couldn't do that. And we had to be very careful. And so it was a very different environment, very frustrating. I think all of us were over the Zoom and over, WebEx and the text messaging, but it's just, that's the type of work we had to conduct for the sake of, the situation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we know a large part of your legislative package was put on hold because of COVID. Kind of bringing that forward to next year, kind of what are your plans for next year, and kind of what are you working on right now?
Well, surprise, broadband. I will continue that effort. I told a lot of my staff and many of my colleagues, I said, you will be tired of me talking about broadband until we actually get some valuable and significant legislation done that would be bicameral and collaborative and all of that from up and down the state. So of course, broadband will be important. And then also other tech kind of for good issues. I think in addition to broadband, we have to start thinking about the digital divide, but also digital literacy programs that will complement that. There's so much more that comes after just the infrastructure that you can focus on.
Yeah.
And my district as well is also very keen on issues of racial injustice and police reform, as well as environmental issues. So we're just sort of building our package now, but looking forward to next year to start to hit the ground running with a lot of those efforts.
Yeah, I think probably one of the more interesting things you're involved in is kind of this special committee on the state's response to COVID. And it's not really getting a lot of attention kind of in the media, but I think it has huge potential to kind of help shape this forward. And kind of we're hearing a lot of members kind of say, well, do we need a special session? How are we going to kind of be that balance to the governor's kind of response through the end of the year? Can you kind of talk to us? Because, kind of your committee could be that balance of kind of what you guys are working on right now in that special committee.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just really glad to be chairing this committee. It's a lot of work, but it's also of course, we're in the thick of this pandemic. And so having information readily at my hands to be able to convey to my caucus, but also to my residents has been very, very valuable. So within the committee, we actually have whittled it down to a Senate coordinating group who has been meeting before session, had been meeting almost every week with the administration and figuring out some really key innovations, ideas, and asking questions and having tough conversations about the issues at hand, whether it's testing and contact tracing, community spread, reopening of schools, EDD and unemployment claims not being expedient enough, digital divide, of course. So we had it ran the gamut. The committee had 3 hearings, one of which focused on skilled nursing facilities, testing and tracing when it first started, when the pandemic first started, and then also just a focus on the border region. The Senate now came out with a plan, which includes much of those priorities. So we have policy priorities, fiscal priorities, and through the end of the year, the Senate will also coordinate joint hearings. The pandemic committee, along with the maybe budget committee or the public safety committee, on various issues of interest, which could be, the spread at our jails and prisons, immigrant populations, essential workforce, workforce safety, a lot of different issues. And so we're going to host those oversight hearings through the end of the year, ensure that we're, getting the questions answered to the public, and ensuring that we're on the right track for future management, because we're not out of the woods yet, unfortunately, with this pandemic, and we need to be prepared in 2021 if this should look the same.
Yeah, people are getting kind of, tired and frustrated that, this doesn't seem to be getting really any better. And, depending where you are, it's kind of getting worse. Maybe it's getting a little better, but, we really aren't seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. What do you think is going to get us there? And kind of what do you think the timeline is for us starting to, even be able to, kind of just go to school with some precautionaries and, kind of get people's lives, semi back to normal? Because I think that's the first step, getting the kids back to school.
Yeah, I mean, I am just as antsy as any other parent is. I want my kids out of the house, and I want them in school and learning in a productive manner. And I want to ensure, most importantly, that they're safe.
Right.
I would hate any kid to go into an environment. And we know with COVID, unlike the flu, you could be asymptomatic and, of course, not know that you have COVID and then spread it on to other people. We don't have a vaccine yet, and we don't have any FDA-approved antivirals that will actually remedy the COVID virus. So it's really sticky right now. We're in this really sort of murky waters. We know things are up ahead, and we know that there are innovations happening, but we don't have a final date yet. And that's, I think, what's so frustrating for me, even as a legislator. I wish I had a magic ball that said, okay, September of next year, we're going to be completely done with this.
Right.
But we're not. So I think what's nice about this committee and the coordinating group and the work very collaboratively with the administration has been that we've been figuring out the steps, and who the main players are, and what the state needs to do to fill in the gaps of what, we could have done better, and then looking ahead at other areas as well. I mean, we've been talking about discussing with, South Korea and Germany and New Zealand on what they did. Their contact tracing has been so robust. And they put in, a robust testing strategy. So how can we learn from not just our bubble here in California or even other states? How can we learn from other countries that have done incredible work, and we're able to get to a reopening plan right away, given lower rates. But people at the end of the day still need to wear their masks. It's not a political statement. It's just wear your mask. It's a science statement, and continue to wash your hands and continue to physically distance. As much as that hurts, the more we can do now, the better we are off, next year and future years. Yeah,
one interesting thing is your committee sent a letter to the governor on September 2nd, and kind of one interesting thing you guys highlighted was on testing. And the governor recently announced some partnerships on getting tests back in 24 or 48 hours, which is a big improvement. But you're seeing, I guess, a lot of these professional sports leagues kind of doing these daily tests with these quicker turnarounds. How possible or how quick are we on these horizon to get, I guess, quicker, more instantaneous testing?
That's a great question. And we have actually one rapid test here in Long Beach at the Queen Mary. And that was actually done with a partnership with a personal relationship that the city had with a business owner, a local business owner. And he was able to get he had a lab relationship and was able to get that fast turnaround right away. I think it's like less than 24 hours, which is the best that we have, I think, almost in LA County, but definitely in the city of Long Beach. Right now, I think the testing turnaround for 48 hours in the state is about 80%. And we're trying to get that, of course, to 100%. There are still some places like, pharmacies came into the mix a little bit later. I just went to the pharmacy 3 days ago and had my test done. I got it, about 3 days later. But the rapid testing, that is something that the state is absolutely putting so much effort into, with new lab environments, new relationships, putting out requests for innovation to ensure that there's more, business relationships and more innovative connections that could be made to ensure that we do have rapid testing, or at least at the latest 48 hours.
Right.
And so that is looking good. I would have probably not said the same thing 2 months ago, but now, given all that we've learned and the data that we've retrieved, I think we're in a much better position. So I think in October is when we'll start to see the state really move forward with testing results, and hopefully a platform that will allow us, just like we do with COVID tests, like hospitalizations, et cetera, testing turnaround times.
Kind of testing and contact tracing go hand in hand. And kind of, I guess, can you kind of explain why a quick turnaround is necessary for contact tracing efforts?
Yeah, the quick turnaround is really essential, I think, especially for people that are symptomatic. And then you think of essential workers, even that are asymptomatic. But it's important because as soon as we know that somebody is positive, then that means that we know that they need to quarantine. We can then, per state law, because of a lot of the laws we passed, like AB 685, which was a Reyes bill, which basically states that if an employee has tested positive with COVID, they need to then tell the employer, and the employer then needs to tell the rest of the workforce, and then also ensure that the local health department knows about it, so it's tracked. And that's just a data tracking purpose, but then they need to start the contact tracing process, and it allows it to go faster, so people know right away if somebody within their universe has tested positive and if they have exposure as well. So contact tracing, I think, is such a vital component to our success. Right now we have about 10,000 contact tracers that have been trained. We need, I think 40,000 in order for it to be a more robust plan. So we're still working on that, but it's such an integral part of our success.
That was my next question, because we're averaging between 4,000 to 10,000 positives per day, given month. So let's say it's just 5,000 tests, positives per day. How many contact tracers do you need to track and trace those 5,000 cases?
Yeah, I think that the estimate is about 40,000 for the state to be successful. And right now we have, again, about 10,000. So we have got to do more work. And I think there are people really willing, like I've had people in my, my constituents that are really willing to help. They're willing to do so for free. They want to just help. They want to give their time. Some of them have been trained in other sort of medical aspects, and they just really want to be able to be retrained and then get into this opportunity to just help folks. Bilingual contact tracers are going to be important as well. We do have them, especially here in LA County, but we know that we'll need more of them in areas that are completely underserved, high essential workforces. They're going back home to crowded, homes, possibly spreading the virus to family members, and not knowing or feeling like they have to go back to work because they can't lose a week of work and then possibly spreading it to other colleagues.
Right.
So this is something so vital. And allowing people to know too that contact tracing is not, we're not trying to invade their privacy, but more so just safeguard them for health and safety reasons. And so there's a lot of mistrust in some of these communities that are unserved. And so we've got to combat that with a lot more messaging and education about what that actually means.
You touched upon, I guess, talking to other countries. And I know like China and South Korea have done a lot with, I guess, mobile phones and Bluetooth in this contact tracing effort. I think even in China, you can get a test and, basically go about your day with a positive test. Is that something you guys are looking at, using kind of technology to contact trace?
Well, I think a lot of businesses are looking at that now. Private businesses are looking at technology. And yes, the state has been looking at contact tracing technology. The committee, I think our very first hearing back in May, had asked about what those contracts actually entailed. So, the large tech companies wanted to be a part of the contact tracing efforts. And so we just wanted to ensure, as a state, absolutely we want to ensure that people have an opportunity, businesses have an opportunity to use tech, that we use tech, but we do so in a way that also protects consumer privacy as well, of course.
Yeah, I guess this is something I get a lot is people come up with great ideas about a technology that might be helpful. I guess what's the best way to kind of approach, I guess, the administration about kind of some of these technologies and how they could be helpful to the state or businesses?
Well, I think, again, the request for innovation, we want to ensure that we're spurring innovation, especially in this time, but we don't want to do so on the backs of residents just for the sake of profit or just for the sake of data that they could then monetize later on. We don't want to do that with anything. I think this is where the tech for good needs to come in, is to ensure that we're doing so with the intention of finding out what is happening with this virus, finding trends, and really putting safeguards and guardrails. That's what we've done in the Senate Judiciary Committee, in ensuring that if a business is going to deploy a specific type of technology to use for contact tracing, that they're doing so appropriately, and that they're not utilizing, or leaking, private information about a specific employee that might be COVID positive, et cetera. So a lot of work in place. I'm sure you'll see more bills next year related to privacy, and as soon as we get, all of the technology sort of confirmed and we kind of figure out where we're at a bit better with contact tracing overall.
It kind of, we're experiencing maybe a early fall here with all these wildfires and smoke. The temperatures are dropping. It's getting darker earlier, and kind of we're all being kind of pushed inside because the air is not so good outside. The fall has always been warned as kind of a concern as we're all going back inside. What I guess are the suggestions or recommendations as we enter this fall? Kind of what should we be looking forward to, and kind of how should we be kind of taking care of ourselves?
Well, the same thing I would kind of reiterate is, of course, wear a mask, wash hands, everything we've been hearing about, but you've got to hear it like 20 more times. Make sure you're socially distant. I mean, I know that we all want to have Thanksgiving together. We all want to have Christmas together. I'm used to going to Christmas in LA with my grandmother, and she's 92. I haven't seen her since March. Unfortunately, we Zoom just because I want her to be safe. It's not even more so about me. She's elderly and in that vulnerable population. So we have to do some more education on how we keep our family members safe and why it's important to do all these measures. But it's also important to know that, of course, the flu season is upon us. And so flu vaccines are going to be a very big topic of discussion coming into the fall. If our positivity rates are going down, if we feel like it's maybe time to shift and pivot to a hybrid environment, say in our schools, perhaps flu vaccines need to be a part of that discussion and ensuring that kids are vaccinated. Obviously, they're going to be mingling in pods or overall in classrooms, and we need to ensure that it's not exacerbating the COVID issue coupled with flu, that we are doing a lot more education and promoting flu vaccines. And so we're going to use that as a topic of discussion for our committee as well, to ensure that people know what the next steps would be in that. And that people just know that is an option, that we, used to kind of take flu vaccines as like, oh, I'll do it later. That's not a big deal. But now it's even more important to be able to do that, especially with vulnerable populations that need to be notified about that.
No, definitely good advice.
Yeah.
One last thing before you go, having the name Lena Gonzalez, you often get confused on social media with Lorena Gonzalez. What's been your favorite interaction, being confused with Lorena amongst all her fans out there?
Oh my gosh. Well, what's funny is we actually have a lot in common. Values are pretty similar, but of course the name is very similar. You couldn't, it's just so interesting. She was a Teamster. My father was a Teamster. So a lot of similarities, have kids, we're both moms. But I just think that, often I get, told that I was either getting shot down or praised for AB5, which, I had nothing to do with, but happy to support it. I think it's a righteous bill. And of course, also just, anything that she does, I'm always getting her mail as well at the office.
Oh, really?
Or constituents who used to come in before COVID, coming in asking about her bills and asking for meetings, and then realizing it's not the assembly member, it's the senator. So it's really funny. But, if she were a Republican, it'd be a different story. I don't know if I'd like that.
Well, good enough.
But she's great. She's a friend.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and error free. So we did a good job this time. So thank you so much, Lena. Great
That's right. Thank you so
you.
much too. This is
And
really
thank you
great.
for the work you're doing on this this COVID committee. Very informative.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to talking to you again. Stay well.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. We'll talk to you
Bye.
later. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of SacTown Talks. Make sure you like and subscribe on your YouTube page, hit that notification bell, or rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. Thanks to producers Phil and Vernon, and we'll be back to you on Wednesday. Thank you.
Are called dreamers.
Esto hay que darle vida.